Modern Eater Network production. Hell yeah. Let's get this party hopping. No more milling around. Get ready to have a mash ton of fun. Here are your hosts, Andrew Moore and Jeff Tyler.
Hey everybody, welcome to BeerCraft, Colorado's craft beer show. We're coming up to you live from Studio Kitchen, Colorado, home of the Modern Eater Network. I'm Andrew Moore, Intrepid Sojourner Beer Project, here with Jeff Tyler, owner and brewer of Spice Trade Brewing. And we are going strong still in this sort of, is it beer, is it not beer? I feel like by the end of June I would have a more eloquent way of saying it,
yeah,
and I don't.
It's kind of this middle ground, so you don't really know what to call it because it's all new. It kind of, not all of it's new, but some of it's kind of historical and doesn't really fit into an easy bucket. So it's categorizing it, I think, has been the most challenging thing as we've talked to all of our guests so far this month. And, you know, we've had Judd Belstock on from Dos Luces. He was talking about his chicha and pulque, which is a Central American corn and agave-based fermented beverage. That's a mouthful, but he has to deal with that every day. And then we had Dr. Keith Villa on from Seria Brewing Company doing his de-alcoholized, THC-infused beer, which that's also a mouthful. How do you need like a one-word thing for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it was great to talk to Alex Liberati last week about the Eno beers that he's doing. And it's like tasting those, it's like some of them I'm like, oh yeah, this is familiar, this is clearly beer.
Yeah.
And then tasting something on the other end of the spectrum like that sort of port wine-ish one we had last week at the end of the show. It's like, well, feels like clearly wine.
Yeah, it's crazy how much of a spectrum, how much of like a rainbow it is from his like most beer like Eno beer to his most wine like Eno beer, and even the most beer like Eno beer doesn't quite have like it's got something different because they use about 50% grapes for all their fermentables, right? So it has that like acidity, it has that aroma profile that like even like kind of seasoned beer drinkers, they can't quite put their finger on it, and so it's but it's such a cool beverage, and I think it's another one of those innovative beverages that's kind of like blurring the line as far as what can you consider beer. And I think the big thing for me, as we've been talking to everyone this month, has really been have an open mind. Like, don't go into, if you're gonna try something like really unique and really new, you kind of have to go into it with a blank slate. Don't be like, oh, this is going to taste like wine, and that's what I'm getting, or this is going to taste like beer, and that's what I'm getting. You kind of just have to experience it and kind of get used to it a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I was thinking about that last week, actually, when we were talking to Alex and Mike about, so often, like, when we talk about beer, we're talking about sort of the Reinheitsgebot, right? So the 1516 purity laws in Germany where, beer has to have malt, water, and yeast, or hops, excuse me.
Right.
And this is prior to knowing what yeast was.
Right. Yeast wasn't on the list because it was still kind of this like mystical component of fermentation.
Yeah, right. So, but even now, like, I feel like even with some of the crazy stuff that is getting put in beers or the different directions that beer's being pushed in, we're still kind of defining everything by those laws. It's like, it's either like beer plus, right? It's like Hefeweizen plus chamomile, right? Or it's like the anti, but like everything still gets defined by that, and I think we've got to get away from that somehow.
Yeah, it's tricky. I feel like as humans, you need to categorize things to make them make sense, and so it's just like in our nature to want to put things in one bucket or the other, so you kind of know what you're getting into. But I just think with these things we've been talking about this month, you really just have to go into it with no expectations and just see what you think about it.
When I feel like at some point, I wonder if there's a baseline out there, right? Like, there have been breweries that have come out with things like beer-flavored beer, right? And I feel like our baseline in the United States is often Budweiser, right? It's like, this is what we start with. This is like beer-flavored beer,
right?
And then everything else sort of like grows out of that.
Yeah. I feel like a Pilsner, or maybe like, a pale ale, like an American pale ale is like, it's like a beer, but everything that deviates from that doesn't have that bitterness is like, what is this beverage? Like, this is kind of a good example where we're drinking the Scarlet Giant right now. And this, like, it doesn't really taste like beer in the quintessential sense of beer. It has acidity, it has floral notes from the hibiscus, it's sour, it's got some salinity from the Utah rock salt, it's It's got key lime juice in it. Like, it's definitely not a Budweiser, right? So how do you categorize this? And there's a style for it. There's a Goza, which is a traditional style. It's like a starting point, and then you kind of have to be like, and it has this and this and this, and then you kind of have to. You got to drink it,
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like, it feels a little bit reductionist, but to talk about beer is like, well, what's it made out of, right? Is it mostly grain? Is it 51% grain?
Yeah. Which is sort of the legal
and if it is,
definition of beer.
It's beer,
Right.
But, again, like tasting those, the Eno beers, the wine beer hybrids last week, it's like, yes, this is legally beer. And
your brain
I'm all
and taste
about
buds don't
including it,
compute.
but it also feels like there should be some other word for what we're tasting.
Yeah. Eno beer.
Eno beer.
There is.
Yeah.
You have to create new words.
New words.
To define these things.
Yeah. Well, what about you guys? Are you guys creating any new beers at Spice Trade for the summer?
We are creating a new beer. It is ultra super secret.
All right.
But we will be releasing it by the end of the week. So keep an eye on our Facebook and Instagram page for the beer. It's going to be unlike any beer we've put out before, and it's going to be pretty cool. That's all I'm saying.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
Yeah, what are you guys up to? You had your first Friday last week. You were just up in Snowmass, right?
Just came back from Snowmass. We released a couple new beers. Kind of some simpler flavors going into the summer, some lighter stuff. We just released an El Dorado Smash on Friday.
Oh, cool.
We've got our 80 shilling, which is it's a style of beer, so you don't have to worry. No one from Odell calls me and says, "Hey, you have to stop making this beer."
Right. And
Thank you for asking.
You can
every time you drink the beer.
Can
but
you
it's
purchase
fine.
it with U.S. dollars? Is my question.
You can purchase it with U.S.
You don't
dollars.
have to have shillings.
Yeah, don't have to have shillings.
Good.
But yeah, just came back from Snowmass. 2 parts had their 4th annual Snowmass Brewers Rendezvous, and it was awesome. It was gorgeous. The weather was beautiful. There's still a ton of snow up there, but we got really lucky. Very little wind. Everybody was really nice.
Nice.
And it was nice to get up to a part of Colorado I feel like I don't get to very often.
Yeah, that's part of the reason for living here, right?
And there's all these cool breweries there that we don't always get on the Western Slope that are doing some really cool stuff. So it's nice to get exposed to some other parts of Colorado beer culture. I know we talk about like kind of getting the Colorado beer blinders on,
right?
But it's almost like the Front Range blinders, right? Like there's all this other beer stuff going on, and even down south in Colorado Springs, I feel like it sometimes feels far away, but
we'll have to go mobile maybe.
Go mobile to the Western Slope one of these days.
Jay, can we go mobile? Is that in the budget?
Yeah, well, we can. I don't know if it's in the budget or not, but I mean, I'm on board.
Let's do it.
It's just gonna. I don't drink, so we're gonna have to work something else.
All right,
out,
Jay's driving.
Jay's driving. Perfect. Thanks, Jay.
That's what happens.
It'll be fun.
The guy that doesn't drink.
Well, yeah. So, but I'm excited. We've got a guest today who's just been on a more exotic trip than Snowmass.
Yeah.
Will Stuart from Colorado Sake Company is back with us. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I understand you were just in Japan.
I was.
Tasting all the sakes.
There's so many. Yeah. Japan is full of culture, right?
Yeah.
It's 99% Japanese people.
Yeah.
Compared to the United States.
Japan?
So instead of being a melting pot like here, it's everybody's the same. And so they have the same mindset, same diet, same everything. And so it was an experience for sure. And public transportation, everything. Getting to sake breweries was on the list.
Nice. It's got to be tough. Like we're talking to folks like you this month who are really doing kind of these outside the box products, right? And you think about American as kind of enjoying something a little bit different, maybe because of that diversity, because there's a lot of different cultures coming together. But I wonder in a place like Japan, that's got to be a whole nother level of challenge to make something that's like culturally outside that box if that's what everybody is doing.
Yeah, so what was nice is we did tastings across Japan with our sister brewery. So we did 10 tastings at 10 different restaurants all across Japan. And it was interesting to compare what we have to what they have. So we have, the horchata and things like that where they say, oh, is this sake? And you're like, yeah, I know that's sake, but and then we brew things different where they brew to 20% and watered down to 16, so it's a very dry product. We stopped the fermentation at 16% ABV. So it's very easy drinking, and when we did these events, some of the older people were like, I like the Japanese sake, but all the youth really enjoyed what we were doing different bottle, different label, and it was just very easy drinking. And it boded well for us. It gave us some confidence of what we're doing is making sense. And it was a awesome experience.
So who's drinking sake in Japan, right? Because you think, in Colorado, you think about the American craft beer drinker and like the types of folks who go to beer festivals. Who is it in Japan that's really into sake? Is everybody into sake equally?
No, so the older generation is into sake more because that's what they drank during the wars. That's what they grew up with. And so that's their drink. They're calling it like the old man's beverage. That's why these places, breweries have been around for 4,000 or 5,000 years, brewing sake. And little nuances when you're there asking them questions is also interesting. But for the rest of the population there, the youth is really getting into cocktails, getting into craft beer. Most of the craft beer is imported because they don't have that market yet. And it's also tough for them to get ingredients that you guys would use here. And so that's what they're lending towards. It's more of a fun experience. Nobody has a sake like a tasting room like we do.
14 sakes on tap.
Right, and nobody understands like the tasting room aspect is your education. It's your getting right there with the consumer, brand loyalty. So you go to a sake shop with 900 different sakes, and there's a sales guy there, but there's not the education or putting you into a category as you were talking about earlier, like beer is this or this is that. Like what sake do you drink? And that's where they are communicating with the brewers right now of saying, can we get rid of classifications? Like there's a lot of classifications in sake, but removing that to make it less intimidating for the consumer. Because, they were down 8% last year, which is a huge dip for sake, where here it was up 12%. And they're just seeing that decline from the youth.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's cool that you got to, taste your sakes next to these very traditional Japanese sakes. Were people pretty open-minded about that, or was it like, wow, this flavored sake is really strange? It's not. I imagine it's something totally different.
So their culture is all about pairing, and so they would try horchata and be like, oh, I want this with dessert, or I want this with sashimi, and they really enjoyed it, and they really enjoyed our American standard, and that was our goal, is just to get it there and see what happens, right? If they all spit it out, then we're like, no, we're doing something wrong. But they didn't, which was great, and the feedback was nice, and people there are just really nice. They could all be lying to us. This is great.
Yeah,
They throw it over their shoulder.
Oh, yeah, I love this.
Yeah.
I kind of like that, you get to go to the source, right? And I think a big problem with shipping beer anywhere is that, or sake or any beverage product, is that most of the times it's perishable, right? So you have to think about it in that mindset. You have to make sure, okay, I'm bringing this and it's refrigerated the whole time if it has to be, right? So I would imagine a lot of the sake that we get in the States might not even really be what sake tastes like when you go to Japan. Like you hear all these stories of when American IPAs first started going to Europe in unrefrigerated ships, and they get there and everyone's like, oh, this is what they're drinking in America? Cool. Let's drink this, I guess.
You're still bad there.
Yeah. But it's it's not the same product. Did you find something like that when you got to taste it fresh over there?
So we're, yes. So there's two different types of sake. There's pasteurized. So 99% of the market is pasteurized sake. And then there's namazake, which is unpasteurized. And that's where you crack the bottle and it has to stay refrigerated the whole time. You crack it and it has effervescence. You can still taste the yeast. But everything that's shipped to America is pasteurized. So bring it up to 150 for a couple minutes and then drop it back down. And so that's what we have to do for wholesale. Our yeast can live up to 28% ABV. And so if there's still fermentable sugars, things like that, that's our issue, is figuring out how to pasteurize in a larger quantity. Like Stem Ciders does, was it Veltren, or it's a liquid that you put into the can, and if you drink it in the first 24 hours, it's toxic for your body, but after that it becomes CO2. And so after 24 hours, it kills anything in there, any yeast proponent, and then you can drink it.
Right.
So you have to be certified and things like that, or you do the heating process, and it's interesting. But when you're there and you go to a sake bar and there's nothing about the menu, and you just tell them flavor profiles. Luckily, we were touring Japan with the guy that spoke English and Japanese. He was at our sister brewery learning how to brew to open one in Hawaii. and he was a wealth of knowledge, right? He could translate when I was talking to their master brewer, and it was very beneficial for all the brew tours we went on.
Yeah. That's great to have somebody who can obviously bridge that gap, especially when it's a language that's so different, you know, night and day.
Yeah. Most other countries you go to, they'll speak a little bit of English, and we can speak a little bit of Spanish or French or things like that. They speak no English, right? And they're not trying to. They're 99% Japanese. Why would they?
Right. So when you toured these sake breweries, was there any one thing that popped out where you're like, that's how you guys do it? Or was it kind of like, you know, when you're like doing a brewery tour and you're like, oh, there's the mash tun, they put the grain in there, there's the boil kettle, you do this. Was there anything that you're like, whoa, like I didn't know that, or I didn't expect it to be done that way?
Everything, yeah. I mean, we take our process and we've tried to learn through videos and phone calls and things like that, but you go to a brewery that's been there 300 years and they stir the mash every day, twice a day.
Yeah.
And then our sister brewery never stirs the batch. And you're like, well, why don't you do that? And they're like, oh, we think it adds acidity. And then you talk to the other brewery, and they're like, we don't know. We've been doing it for 300 years.
Yeah.
And so then you come back and you think about it, and you're like, oh, well, stirring it every day incorporates oxygen, then you're growing more yeast, and those should give you some off flavors. So don't stir it, right?
I imagine a lot of the science is still pretty new. I mean, this is happening with beer, too. We were talking about this the other day with, like, kettle sours. As we were saying, we have all of these traditions that we do when we make kettle sours. To purge out all the oxygen and pre-acidify and all these things. And the science that's slowly coming in suggests that 8 of those 12 things we probably don't need to do. Right. But we've been doing it for, and
it's working.
And it's working.
And with sake, it's even a longer history of that sort of tradition.
When it's you look at these breweries in Germany, right, that have been making Hefeweizen since 1400, right? They just oftentimes they just make it that way because that's the way that they make it, right?
Yeah,
and
the same thing. So they'll have open fermentation tanks that are flat bottom, and when they go to press to get the liquid out, they literally use like a car jack to jack up half the tank to tilt it. And you're like, well, why is it open? They're like, well, you don't know. Like, how many cells are you pitching with your yeast? I don't know. Like, all those questions that we ask, they don't ask. But then they test things like amino acidity, which I still have no idea how to properly test that, because the liquid that they use to test amino acidity literally says liquid to test amino acidity. It doesn't have like the chemical breakdown. And so there's things that we learned making koji and things that have helped us in the process. And then there's other things where we come back and question it. And it's like how they say the beer breweries in America are probably better than the breweries in Europe because we innovate. We push all the time. We're never just like, oh, we're making sake and that's it. We're making sake with blending of beer yeast and things like that, and trying to push it as far as we can. Same with kettle sours. You can add white koji, as we've discussed before. You can add white koji, which makes the kettle sour done in 5 hours because it's adding citric acid. And it's just the constant push in science is what's going to help us ultimately. Yeah,
I feel like I've said it a lot with beer, and it's like sometimes it's a complaint and sometimes it's like a badge of honor, where it's like American craft breweries are expected to make every single kind of beer pretty decently on the first try, right? Whereas a lot of the traditional European breweries, it's like, oh, we make Hefeweizen, we make wheat beers,
that's it.
We make smoke beers, that's it, right? And they do an amazing job, but the innovation, like you said, is not sort of followed with the years. Like, we're still doing it in caves with the 75-year-old wooden mash paddles because they're inoculated or whatever.
Well, they've taken that joke of this is the best beer I've ever had, what else do you have, right? I mean, we've all heard that in the industry, but they're like, oh, that's it, that's all we're going to make because it's great, you love it, instead of how do we innovate our own brains? Like, how do we push ourselves as brewers? You have to do that daily.
I wonder if that's part of the reason why maybe the older generation is really still into sake and the younger generation maybe just is not super enthralled with it. Maybe it's that lack of innovation or something different than what their parents are used to having.
Yeah, and I think that's it, is that they've seen their parents drink this and they're being advertised like Zuma, right? Where it's like that's one of the biggest consumed beverages there because it's branding, it's Blue Moon's huge there because they have this like wheel that, right, there's sediment in Blue Moon, and so they use this wheel to shake it up and then pour it, and people just love it. But why would you shake a beer before you open it, right? It's like those little things that they don't understand, but they're into it, and they want that craft experience, and it's happening. You guys know about Mickler's, the beer that's over in Germany? They have a couple bars in Tokyo, and we did a tasting there, and people love craft beer. They were charging like $15 for 10 ounces because importing it and doing all that is challenging. And the laws there are very old school, so getting around that.
It's just kind of expensive anyway.
Yeah.
But that's cool. Are people in Japan, are the sake breweries that you went to, do you get the sense that they're excited that American companies are making sake? And I assume there's some other sake places popping up maybe elsewhere around the world, but like, are they excited that this product is being sort of, the manufacturers are being exported?
Yeah, it's only helping them with education, right? If a local sake brewery is popping up, they can go there and taste what they have, and then we can educate them when they go to the liquor store. But they're seeing it dying off of the market instead of thinking of how do I change our branding, how do I change our mindset towards the youth. They're just exporting. So Europe is drinking more sake than ever, the United States and China. So their whole goal is we've been exporting 10%, now we're exporting 60% of what we make. And that's a huge change instead of changing it within your own culture. But they need to change the laws to be able to put hibiscus and things into sake so that the youth can get more, they can stand behind a brand or a product a little bit better.
Yeah. So that's not currently something that you can do in Japan? Add these flavors?
Yeah, so if you add a flavor, you can't call it sake under the current law. You have to call it a liqueur, which kind of deems it as, there's so many liqueurs in the world, and they're all, if they're all dumped there, like what would you know is the difference between a liqueur sake and a liqueur vodka or something like that. So that's where they're lacking of, they need to lax the laws, but that's not going to happen for the next 30 years. So they're going to see this market just continue to plummet, and we're going to see it continue to grow. Yeah. And when we were there, we had an importer there that wanted to bring our product in. We're not ready for that, nor is that what we should do before anything else. But it was nice to see because he understands that we're branding towards the youth.
Yeah, I just want to take a quick break and mention to all of our viewers that if you want to ask Will a question about sake, about Japan, or anything else, and have us answer it on the show, you can go on the Facebook stream that you're watching right now. Type in a question. We're happy to put it up and talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting too because we've been talking a lot about like flavor profiles, right? Like how do you explain this to people? How do you do the education part of it? What do you compare it to kind of just get people like to understand where the starting point is?
Right.
And I think it's interesting that, in Japan, the sake flavor profile doesn't need to be explained to everyone. It's so kind of ingrained into the society. And now you have this craft beer flavor profile that's starting to take off there. People are like, oh, I like this flavor. I like this other category that wasn't really around before. They kind of take to it really well. And you're kind of doing the opposite now in the States where, especially in Colorado, people understand that beer flavor profile. They're like, I know what beer is. It's everywhere. I drink it all the time. But you're taking this other flavor profile that's really foreign and kind of bringing it into the limelight. How do you tackle that problem of like explaining the baseline to people as far as the flavor goes? Because and for those who don't know, sake, we did another episode on sake, but sake is a rice-based wine essentially, right? But the flavors are a lot different than beer is, or than most food products with rice is. Yeah. So how do you kind of set the baseline?
So it all depends. If someone's in the tap room, we'll explain it as it's 100% grain. So we think about it as a beer, but it's a multi-parallel fermentation, so it goes a little bit deeper than that. But I explain it as when people come in, they're like, what is sake? And I ask them, what do you drink? Because we have these barrel-aged dry hop sakes and other things that if you drink wine, you go with the barrel-aged. If you drink beer, go with the dry hopped, and then work your way back to traditional sake because you don't just start off drinking whiskey. Right, you drink a cocktail, then you drink whiskey soda, and then you work your way back to whiskey rocks, whiskey neat, whatever it is. But I don't want to start people with just sake. They need to see how versatile and approachable it can be. Right. And so that's where we start, and then we'll take them to the American standard, which is our traditional Junmai Ginjo, and then explain some terms. So Junmai means true rice wine. If it doesn't say Junmai, it has added alcohol, like a vodka or rum. Most people don't know that. Most people have had a hot sake and they feel bad the next day because it's a lot of vodka, a lot of rum. And so getting to the point of just understanding that it's a rice-based beverage and working your way back from there is our start. Yeah.
Hey, Jay Parker, I just want to chime in. Can you say that part again about sake when it has added alcohol to it? Because I've never even heard, right? So that would explain back to my drinking days when I would consume sake. And I wasn't a huge fan of it back then. You know, I don't know if it's changed now. But can you just elaborate a little bit on that so somebody that heard that and goes, what are you talking about?
So Junmai, the term, there's a couple of terms. So there's Junmai, Junmai Ginjo. Junmai, Junmai Daiginjo. And so when you see the word Junmai, it means true rice wine, no added alcohol. So if it says just Ginjo or Daiginjo, it has vodka or rum in it. And that's on the more premium stuff, you add it because you're fermenting so cold, you're pulling the sweetness from the rice. You want to bring the alcohol content up. Boxed hot sake in sushi restaurants that's on happy hour, they're brewing to 20%, adding a bunch of vodka to take it to 40 to 50%, and then watering it back down to 16. So they're getting more volume per brew. And that's where if you go to a sake restaurant, it's on happy hour, make sure it's Junmai, because if not, you're basically just drinking vodka-flavored sake.
Right. So Junmai is kind of this more premium product, the more kind of whole food, if you will. Like it's not distilled or it's not diluted, or it doesn't have extra additives to it.
I'm learning something every time on this show. Now, I won't remember the words he used to do it, but I'll remember now if I'm out and people are drinking sake, I'd be like, hey, check what's going on, because you might be drinking vodka.
Yeah. And those are like the three terms I basically. There's so many, but those are the three that are very predominant in your face when you're at the liquor store or a sushi restaurant.
Nice. Yeah, but I think it's different because, I mean, before this show, I would have said, we've had all these different people on the show, and we've, Dos Luces and Liberati and Seria, and I feel like the answer has always been like, yes, this is beer. It's different. Like, it's pushing these boundaries. It's incorporating these sort of non-traditional ingredients for beer. But for sake, I feel like for most people, the immediate answer is probably like, no, this is not beer. This is rice wine.
Right.
This is sake. It's its own category.
Right.
But
I feel like the alcohol percentage kind of automatically bumps it up to a different category too, right? Because you think about beer, and I mean, obviously there's some high alcohol beers out there. There's imperial beers that can go upwards of 20% or even higher, right? But like most beer you think about, it's like 4 to 7% maybe is the average range. Not to say that there aren't beers that are above that, there are, but like because this is a 15.5% alcohol by volume product all the time, I think about it more like a wine where you would drink it in smaller quantities and maybe drink it with food versus a beer which you might just kind of casually have.
Sounds like you need to drink more.
Because I'm not drinking 15.5% beers.
Yeah, right? No, I mean, we have people that come in and do full flights where they'll have 20 ounces of 15%, and they love it, right? Because sake has that different, I think it has a different drunk to it, like you feel different, where there's, in a bottle of sake, we've like 2 grams of residual sugar and 15.5% ABV and no sulfates, no tannins, gluten-free, where it's literally just rice, yeast, and koji and water. So it's a different approachable thing, and that's why at our tap room we also do like a cocktail of the week. So it'll be 9% ABV poured over rocks, and so it just makes it a little bit easier drinking. But yeah, it's tough to put it in its own category. Nothing else is multi-parallel fermentation. Wine is a fermented fruit. Beer is a fermented sugar of what that you're making in your mash. And our mash sits there for 4 weeks at a low temperature. We stir it once a week, and it's totally different. So it's tough to explain easily, right? Unless like we do tours where you're like, that is rice porridge fermenting. It's bubbling right now.
But I think in my mind, it seems like you're going about it the right way, right? You kind of, because it's so obscure, you have these introductory versions of what you're making that people can really easily say, oh, this is like that barrel-aged beer that I really like.
Right.
And so it's an easy intro, like, oh yeah, if I like barrel-aged beer, I like this. And then you can kind of work them towards the more obscure sake, which is really the most traditional sake, right?
Right. And that's the goal, is how do you introduce someone to a product they've never had? And so I had this business guy tell me when we first started, he goes, are you creating a market for a product, or are you creating a product for a market? And that's the challenging thing. You never create a market for a product. That's kind of what we're doing. And so we're kind of flipping around that business aspect where you're creating a market for flavored sake that doesn't exist right now. And how do you do it? And it's going to be a slow roll, but it's going to be good to get people to enjoy a beverage and to be confident when they go into a place and order.
Yeah.
When you order a Pilsner, you know what you're getting. When you order an IPA or you order a Scarlet Giant's a little bit different, but you can take that education and go towards that. Mm-hmm. And that's the goal.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, too. A lot of the folks that we talked about, hard seltzer is one of these things we've kind of been talking about a lot lately, and there's this big trend in the hard seltzer category right now. And a lot of it comes back to calories and alcohol percentage.
Yeah.
And so I think there'll be something there for sure for folks who are calorie conscious but still want to enjoy. Hey everyone, part 2 of Beer Craft, slight technical difficulties, but we're back. Talking to William Stuart from the Colorado Sake Company. We finished off talking a little bit about how the sake is made. You mash for 4 weeks, you were saying?
Yeah.
So a little bit different than beer, but I kind of want to pivot a little bit and talk about something you mentioned earlier, which was the fact that your sake only has a couple grams of residual sugar, right? We've been talking to a lot of folks this week, this month, about hard seltzer, which is this product category that's just kind of like exploding right now. And I think a lot of people like it because it's low calorie, right? So I'm just kind of curious what quote unquote low calorie.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a calorie is a calorie, right? Like 100, I guess it's 100 calories.
Yeah.
But it's still, 100 calories that you're drinking. But what do you think about that? What do you think about the sort of maybe getting those folks who are interested in low residual sugar products to get excited about sake?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you want. So you could do, we've suggested buying our sake and doing it on the rocks with a no-calorie flavored soda, right?
Okay.
You could do something like that, but 15% ABV, it's 100 calories per 3 ounces, and so kind of translates to being equal-ish to everything else, but a little bit more ABV on the back end. I don't know. I drink sake all the time. I'll have a bottle at night. And the term that I learned in Japan is good sake by the next morning. So
if you feel good the next morning.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah.
So at Junmai Daiginjo, you drink and the next morning you feel fine. It's because it's very clean and it is what it is. But hard seltzer, I mean, there's a lot of sugar, right? Or fake sugar. That's giving you that black cherry note or the grapefruit note. I mean, it's not natural. They're not adding real grapefruits to it.
Yeah, and I think, that's the interesting thing for me. And you look at certain brands of sparkling water, and you might buy the raspberry lime sparkling water, but it's most likely not made with actual raspberries and limes. Yeah. It's made with extracts, whether they're natural or artificial, and sort of concentrates. When you're doing it on that scale industrially, it's kind of what you have to do.
Right. Yeah, well, it's a smaller serving size, but I mean, calories are sort of tied to alcohol, right? Like having a lower residual sugar helps, but it's having a smaller serving size and a lower ABV goes most of the distance towards getting the calories way down.
Yeah, the alcohol is a big influencer there for sure. I think, you talked about cocktails that you guys are doing. I think that's really interesting. From a craft cocktail point of view, I think bartenders are always trying to innovate. We talked a little bit about beer cocktails, and we've done a couple with a few high-end cocktail bars, which I think are super cool to use like a beer topper and kind of integrate some other ingredients into it. But sake seems like this whole other ingredient that you can start using in craft cocktails to really diversify them a little bit.
And that's a good opportunity for us, is getting into a bar, getting on a happy hour, and then finding a way to end up on the cocktail list.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you're a liquor and you're not on the cocktail list, the only way you're getting orders is if you're requested. And so finding our way onto the cocktail list is key, because then it just shows our versatility of, sake can be your base spirit, quote unquote, or sake. It could be the base to the cocktail, and that's worked really well for us. Like, we have a spicy Paloma on draft, and we've done matcha lemon cocktails and martini glasses, and it just we're getting a slushy machine, those little things that show people like a beer slushy could be a different realm. Like stem cider slushies probably crush. I mean, they have two and everybody's in there drinking them, and they're cheap because the low ABV, easy drinking. They're all gimmicky, but it's you got to start somewhere to work them back to this is an IPA or this is a sake. And
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't think I struggle with some of that stuff in like gimmicky. I think I don't think it should be. Like I think it should. If it's a way that's like meant to sort of change the flavor or highlight certain flavors or play well, like in a cocktail or something. I tend to be like, let's do it. But I'm also, put the orange on the side of your Hefeweizen glass. Right. Put the basil leaf in the basil IPA. I mean, why not?
I mean, if it works for you and people like it, what's the problem?
I mean, people drink cocktails, right?
Yeah.
And those are sort of the most gimmicky looking things you could drink.
I mean, cocktails were originally created during the Depression when the supply of alcohol was so low quality that they had to put other things in it just to make it palatable. They had to put, like the old-fashioned, like you had to muddle cherries and oranges in there because, like, you just didn't want to drink it without that.
Because it was made in someone's bathtub.
Made in a bathtub, right.
It's also when you're a kid, you don't just immediately say, oh, IPAs are my beer, right? You start with MD 2020, or some flavored vodka with orange juice, and then you work your way to that. And that's the idea of doing the cocktail with a beer or cocktail with a sake is you work your way back to what it is on its most simplest form. Like this is sake, this is beer.
I like that because I feel like for a lot of people the urge is to think about it in the opposite direction, right? It's like let's start with the base flavors,
right,
and then let's kind of like build the pyramid on top. So like here, you use the example of whiskey earlier. It's like here's some whiskey. Here's whiskey on the rocks. The water kind of opens up some of the flavors and aromas a little bit better. And here's a whiskey cocktail like a Manhattan or something that still has a lot of that whiskey flavor. And now here's this crazy cocktail with all these flavors going on in it. Like that, I feel like is how most people kind of want to approach it. Like learn this flavor and then start adding to it. And I like this idea of sort of starting in the opposite direction and then kind of subtracting back.
Yeah, I hate saying it, but it's like dumbing it down, right? So, I want to learn sake and everything about sake, and it's like, well, try our lychee nagori, and then work your way back to American Standard because I want to talk you through each thing you're drinking, and that's the tap room has just been so instrumental to being the educational forefront, so that the 21-year-olds that are getting sake, they know us as what sake is instead of Gekikon or big brands that you can't even pronounce.
Yeah. When I keep thinking about that liquor store you mentioned earlier, Japan, where you'd have like 900 different sakes, and like the person working there wouldn't be able to tell you anything about any of them. I'm just imagining that here.
That is here. It's every liquor store selling craft beer.
That's why people buy White Claw.
But I just feel like, that I can just like hear the 1-star reviews rolling in. Like I went to this liquor store and the guy didn't know anything about sake.
Right.
I can't but that, we've been talking to people about education for 2 months now, and it's hard, right? Like, and people don't always want to go to the bar and be educated, right? And they're like, I want a beer.
Yeah.
I want,
We talk about that a lot, I think, especially when you're doing something a little bit boundary pushing, right? Not everyone's going to get it. Not everyone's going to want to get it, right? And maybe those aren't your customers, or maybe on that day those aren't your customers. But I definitely, I think people kind of need to be steered a little bit. And so if you have this entry level, if you're doing something a little bit outside the box, but you have these entry level varieties that people can get behind, then it's a good way to start that conversation, just to give them something that they can, kind of understand and enjoy, and then get them to move step by step towards something else.
Yeah.
It's for someone who's never had sake, how would you describe the flavor of sake?
That's tough because it depends on which one. Like, they're so different from a super dry to a super floral to acidity and this and that, but it's a low. The floral ones are very approachable to new sake drinkers, and the dry ones kind of taste like a low ABV vodka, right? Easy drinking, you can have on the rocks. You can. It's like shochu. A lot of people don't know anything about shochu, but it's the #1 consumed spirit in the world, but we don't know it in America because we're not in Asia. So we're doing a collab right now with Iron Ton Distillery down the road, a couple blocks from us. Super cool. She used to be the distiller at Stranahan's, and now she's having fun with stuff. So we basically press our batch and then throw our pressed rice into a tank with water and sugar, and it re-ferments, and then we distill it, and that's shochu. And we're going to try and introduce that into the market, and just different ways to get people to understand the Japanese culture. I mean, the number one selling cuisine in the state is Asian cuisine. It's the first time in a year. Well, this is the first year in ever, right? Because it's always been steakhouses. And so now it's the education to the servers, so that if the servers know about sake, then they're our sales staff, and then they can sell sake to anyone. But you have to get the understanding from servers. So we're doing WSET classes for our accounts to help them understand sake and promote sake.
What kind of classes?
WSET. It's so WSET has wine. I think they just added beer, and so you have like the Corda sommeliers, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is incorporating different beer, wine, sake, and spirits, and you can go level 1, level 3 in each category, which has been great. So if we do that for sake, because there's nothing really out there for sake besides that, and so that allows our accounts to be more educated, to take that to their staffs, and then their staff can be smarter.
I think that's a really important point too, especially when you're dealing with something that's so different, is that, we kind of take for granted that when you sell your beer to a beer bar or a restaurant, that that staff will know enough about beer to communicate to the customer what it is that they're drinking. But with a new product like sake or like Eno beers or like chicha, you need to take it across the finish line, you know what I mean? And like you said, it's really important to have that taproom level of education, which you can totally control the story, you can control the narrative, you can control that education component, you can make sure your staff's well educated. But once the product leaves your doors, you really need to make sure that the restaurant or bar is going to do as good or better of a job than you would communicating that product to the customers. Right. So having these educational programs, I think, is great, and it's good to hear that there's one for sake.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys do the same thing of getting your product in, explaining the product, and the staff understands it, or having them come in for a brew tour, things like that. Ben over at Infinite Monkey Theorem, when we originally were launching this, he was great, just helping us get it off the ground and just explaining things. And he basically broke it down. He goes, you have your sales staff, and then you have your servers, which are your sales staff. So bring them in, give them tours, give them free things so that they understand what you're doing and they have a story to stand behind. Right. And that's where we're ending up in some beer bars, because they want a different option than cider for their gluten-free option. And so that's where we fall in, is you could do the dry hopped, which is gluten-free but tastes like a beer, so it's an easy transition.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think that education component is awesome, and I love that you're working into the beer market. I got to come by because you guys just opened up your new tap room, right?
Yes. So now we're 1,000 square foot tap room.
Nice.
Super exciting.
Yeah.
12 sakes on tap. We'll have 4 traditional sakes, and then all the rest will be nice infusions, flavors, barrel aged, dry hopped, cocktails. It's been great. A lot of murals on the walls, and you can hang your origami from the ceiling, and just it's a.
Do you have origami nights?
We are starting to. So we're going to start doing Tuesdays will be buy one get one, and then Wednesdays we're going to pair Japanese Kit Kats to sake.
Sweet.
So they have like wasabi Kit Kats and just really out there stuff, which is just going to help us educate people on flavor profiles, pairings, things like that.
Yeah,
nice.
This is a total side note, but I remember being in Japan. Like there's nothing that you cannot get out of a vending machine.
No.
Like if you're like, oh, I would love a wasabi flavored Snickers bar.
Yeah.
There's a vending machine for that.
Well, what was crazy is
That's awesome.
I was in my hotel room one night, and I had a phone call at 4 a.m. because it was in New York, and I had to deal with this guy. And I went out of my room because I was trying to have a conversation, and right next to my room was a beer vending machine. So I could get a Sapporo at 4 in the morning. There's no law against not, like, they don't check your ID. You just ring the button, and Sapporo comes out, and you drink it. It was, their society is very in line, where we're like rebels in the world, right?
Yeah, we need some more rules to make sure people don't go off the deep end.
Right. Like, I don't know, I imagine where they used to do, like, tattoos. Tattoos used to be, like, you're the bad person if you have a tattoo, and that's where it all stemmed from, is Japanese prisons would tattoo people because those are the guys you don't want to talk to in society. And now it's everybody's in line because of it. Like when you go there and you get on an escalator, everybody's on the left side unless you're walking up and you go on the right. It's just natural. Like people just know where they belong. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm excited for Kit Kat Night. It's the short version of that.
Yeah, I'll be there to try the wasabi ones. I hope you have them. I tried to make a beer with wasabi once. It was an epic failure, and I don't recommend anybody else try it.
How bad did it fail?
Well, it was not so great. It was actually inspired by this where was I? I was out in Buena Vista, and there's an ice cream shop there that had a peach wasabi ice cream. And I was like, this is weird. I have to try it. And so I tried it, and it was the coolest. Like, the flavors just worked. Yeah. It was, like, creamy and cold and had that spice, like that kind of like back of the sinus spice from the wasabi. But, like, the peaches worked really well, and it was awesome. I was like, I'm going to make a peach wasabi cream ale. It's going to be great. And it wasn't great. It was a small batch of it. We didn't even end up actually releasing it. We just dumped it. We do some weird experimental stuff, and sometimes it doesn't make it. But the problem was that, like, either it's super wasabi, so we make this jalapeno pilsner, jalapeno lina, and it's a good balance of heat and flavor, but drinkability. And that's what I was shooting for with the wasabi, because you don't want to drink, you don't want to drink like sinus exploding wasabi levels. But the problem was, there was no middle ground. Either like it tasted like you were just eating spoonfuls of wasabi, or it tasted kind of like watered down like roots and wasabi. It was like, it's just this kind of like, something's wrong with this beer. Like, something's not right. Like, it wasn't like a good thing. It was just something wasn't right. So at any rate, I don't recommend putting it into a beer. It might work actually pretty well with the sake. But that's why we experiment. That's why we play with things, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't,
So where is the tap room, and when can we go?
So tap room's on 35th and Larimer. We are open now 5 days a week, Tuesday through Saturday. Tuesdays through Fridays 4 to close, then Saturdays all day. You can come down, try sake, talk to the brewers, talk to everything, and just learn, which is good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely be coming by, check out what you guys got on tap. And I think we're getting towards the end of our show here, but thanks so much for coming on and talking to the people about the cool stuff you're doing.
I'm expecting you eventually to write the book, right? Like The Joy of Homebrewing before sake. Because that's like, while we're having this conversation about education and things, like there's no manual, right? There's no this is how you do sake. Like, there's some information out there on the internet and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a couple books out there that are not good. I mean, they're right. You learn them, and then you like add Morton salt substitute and Epsom salts and things like that. You're like, no. Once you do that trial and error, you can explain it super easy to people. And yes, I think that's probably the next step along the way.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, when you do write the book, we'll have you back on the show.
Done.
You have to sign the book.
Do the signing party here. It'll be great.
Yeah, it'll be awesome.
Okay.
So thanks again for coming on the show. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, next week we're going to be off. So for those of you just getting at the keyboard, waiting for Beercraft next Monday, we won't be here. But the following Monday we will. Yeah, so Modern Eater will be out on the road doing their sort of annual road trip out to the Western Slope to meet with a lot of the farmers and restaurateurs on that side of the Rocky Mountains. Yeah. That helps make all this great food and beer possible. Yeah. In the meantime, if you're a fan of the show, or if you're just a fan of beer and education in general, we just started Craft Beer Summer School. Yeah. So it started last Thursday at Co-Brew. It's 3 4-week sessions. You can sign up for one. You can sign up for all 3. The one that's running right now is technical brewing. Then there'll be sort of adjunct brewing and sort of different spices and things. And then sort of we're going into beers of the world. So, Brews Beers, Jade Mountain talking about beer in China, the adjunct brewing, the beer and food, Spice Trade is a part of it, Intrepid Sojourner is a part of it, Alpine Dog is a part of it, with the technical brewing that's going on right now, Woods Boss is a part of it, Co-Brew just had theirs, Burns Family, I think Wayne alone has like 4,000 years of brewing experience, so it's definitely... It's definitely worth your time. We'll throw the Eventbrite link up on the Facebook page if you're interested. And otherwise, we'll see you on the 24th. Sounds good. See you next week, or 2 weeks from now.